Okay, great. With that, officially broadcasting, so welcome everyone to Friday morning, June 16th, Economic Development Commission. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on somewhat of an off-cycle meeting. I know we're generally the first Friday, and a couple of folks have some scheduling conflicts and haven't been able to join, but I appreciate everyone being able to get here today. Our primary business for today is going to be outdoor dining, but before we get that far, I would like to review the minutes from our May meeting. And if anyone has any comments or questions, would entertain those now. Otherwise, entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve the minutes.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, thanks, everybody. So for our standing agenda items, first up, we've got our land use liaison. Bob, I know.
It's me?
Yep, I think that's primarily you.
The last meeting, I'll boil down the 2.5 hours to just a few seconds here. It was, what we did was, we came up with 4 properties that the city owns that we felt were worth looking into for housing development. And those were the City Hall lot, the lot out at Atlantic Heights, and the former skate park, and the Sherburne School. And we sent that information to City Council for them to work on further, maybe do engineering and see what the viability of each of those lots is. And contrary to what you might have read in the Seacoast Online, there was no ranking. We didn't say Sherburne is number 1. There might have been comments by someone that they thought that that was the best fit, but we never did a vote and ranked them. So, in my opinion, we gave them the 4 properties, and that was it. So,
Thank you.
yeah, other than that, that's all we were tasked to do.
Great.
Any questions or anything?
And so I would say at this point, is the council going to be taking next steps on identifying, selecting,
Yeah,
and then?
maybe Karen can weigh in on that. Or Vince.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've been looking at it, and I think that we're making plans to move ahead. I don't know all the details, but I think the primary focus is the Panaway area, the school there. And there are other good sites too, but they can only do one at a time, apparently. And so it's, I don't know, do you have more on that?
The next step in the process of conversations and studies involves a presentation at June 20th's council meeting by folks from the PHA Limited, Development Limited, the group that's the adjunct, the development arm, not the operational arm. I believe it's Tom Farini and Kathy Bergeron and someone else whose name escapes me. And they'll be presenting their preliminary study for what they understand to be the pros and cons and the material situation relative to the site at Sherburne School.
There was some discussion and question about whether PHA should be the partner or whether we should look for other developers. So, I mean, in my opinion, PHA kind of keeps the money in the community. So if there are extra funds from a project, they're going back into Portsmouth. They're not going somewhere, Portland, Maine, or wherever. So, but that's, I guess, will probably be discussed further.
Yep, and Mr. Chairman, the third presenter from PHA Limited will be Adam Rudig. So those three will be there next Tuesday evening.
Great, good update. I know we've got Ben on next, and you've got some time conflict this morning, so why don't I throw it to you for the Chamber Collaborative update?
Yeah, sure. I don't have much to update this morning. We are in a relatively quiet time of year. When the city gets busy, we slow down because the work is not needed to fill our restaurants and retail shops. It's kind of a quiet time of year for us. We are spending a lot of time doing some significant planning, putting together a 3-year strategic plan. We just had our retreat on that. It looks like, continued to do some of the work that we've been doing these past couple of years with a significant focus on large community issues, including housing and childcare and education and connectivity to the business community in those areas. So that's really where that seems to be heading, along with some DEI focus as well. So things are looking good. We're putting all our plans together for this coming fiscal year. Our fiscal year wraps up here in about 2 weeks, so we're in the throes of end of fiscal year stuff, but things like Restaurant Week for the fall are well underway in planning and a variety of things. I think I've mentioned before, we do have the Street Life 400th version this summer on August 15th on Congress Street. That event is sold out with a waiting list at 900 people, so it's going to be quite the to-do and quite the celebration for the business community of 400 years of commerce in Portsmouth, and we're excited about that. So that'll be Tuesday, August 15th, and we appreciate the partnership with the city to work through all the logistical planning of that process. That's it for me.
Great, thank you, Ben. And we've got Sean on next with the Office of Economic Development.
Sure, thanks, Phil. Just a couple of updates. A week ago, Tuesday, we had a small business event at 3S Art Space, and all the feedback was pretty positive. We basically set up a couple of panels to share their stories and answer questions, such that the small businesses in the room would hear from other small businesses like them, as opposed to myself or others. So all indications was that was valuable time. They were long panels. I was a little concerned. They were an hour each, but the time got filled up and there was a lot of conversation. So we did that in partnership with the SBA and with the Chamber. And there was a lot of good information from the SBA regarding financing. So I thought that sounded particularly helpful for small businesses who may not know about that or just haven't had time to look into that. And my guess is it was so popular we might try to make that an annual event. But it was kind of said, why is Portsmouth a great place for small business, either starting one or having one or growing one? And it was a good start to a conversation. The only other two items I'll give you is the AFTA, the Americas for the Arts survey. I believe all the collection is wrapped up in terms of interviewing attendees and also interviewing the arts venues. So the AFTA folks have that information. I think we're going to get some initial data back in the fall, but the big presentation will be closer to the end of the year, where they will actually come here and have open sessions to present the impact of the arts on our economy. So stay tuned for that. If you have specific questions, please reach out to me. And the last thing is we signed a contract with a consultant for the cultural plan process. That was signed on Monday. I've already started sending them background information, and we're hoping to get that kicked off very early July with the first session where the consultants come here, meet with the cultural planning subcommittee, and it will be all hands on deck to the end of the year to deliver a cultural plan to City Council. So lots of things taking shape and moving forward, in addition to what we're doing here.
Great, excellent.
Questions? Thanks, Phil.
Okay, and we've got one of our city councilors here with us today, so Councilor Lombardi, do you want to?
Yeah, the EDC ordinance process has moved forward, and so I thought I would take my time today to deal with that. I know we just received that this morning. It's, as far as we are concerned, or as I am concerned, I think it's ready to go. So there are some changes that from legal and from the governance committee, who both reviewed this and have vetted it. A couple of things that were corrected. One was the interaction between staff and the commission is that, this is a commission of a city council, so there's a protocol of dealing with the city manager and not dealing directly with staff. So that was changed within the verbiage of the document to address that. A couple other things, let's see. I think that was a pretty major legal thing. There's a lot of, they combined some paragraphs, and, I won't read through them and go through that, and they just made some minor changes in legal.
Chair, I'd like to request that if city councilor's update is specific to the outdoor dining ordinance, that we have that as part of that conversation. That's already on the agenda? Or are we moving to that now? I'm
I'm trying to get through this just quickly, and then I think we're just going to deal with the.
So there are no other updates that you have other than related to the ordinance?
I just
Okay.
wanted to do
I
this,
just wanted to
yeah.
clarify.
So I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I expect that this will now be put on the agenda of the city council, and we'll move forward.
At their next meeting?
July 10th.
July 10th.
Thank you. We'll review this and stay tuned on the July 10th meeting. And would the council like us present to on hand for any comments, questions?
That might be useful.
Great.
To have someone here. Yeah,
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate the work you put in there.
well, I appreciate the work that the committee did. They did a
Absolutely,
good
yeah.
job.
Tom Watson did a great job leading us through that, so thank you to Tom. Okay, and then next is the core of our conversation for today, so why don't we turn the page to our outdoor dining discussion. So this was referred to us by the council earlier this year after some internal discussions that the council had, and trying to formalize what had been operated for the last few years on a policy basis, somewhat a temporary basis, as the council, I believe, was working towards trying to formalize an ordinance and create some more certainty, both for the retailers, business community, and the restaurants, so that everyone could operate on a more defined basis moving forward. So we formed a smaller working group to digest all of the information that had been provided to us from the past few years. That group consisted of Ann Weidman, Alan, myself, Anna Howard, and Everett, and Ben also as well. And I'm not sure if Ben is still with us.
They were, I just minimized the box.
Great. So the intent with that was to distill down what we had available to us, take some of the feedback that we'd heard that we both know had been presented to the council, had past readings, and try to bring a plan back to this full commission for a more meaningful, complete discussion based on that. And so that's what I'm hoping we can do here today. What our primary goals were to try to come up with something that was as equitable as possible, recognizing that based on certain locations of businesses, it's unique where there may or may not be parking, may or may not be travel lanes and sidewalk, and everyone's impact is somewhat different. So trying to address that and provide some uniformity, and we can get into further detail. I think Ann has prepared a slideshow that we can kind of walk through with some of our feedback. So without further ado, why don't we jump into that and then get into questions and comments that the commission has. And after that, I open it up to public comments.
Great. Thank you, Phil. I put together a deck that really kind of illustrates the topics, the different categories that we talked about in our working group. I think the easiest thing is if I just sort of roll through the whole thing so you see the complete thoughts that we had that could be recommendations to council. and then maybe go back to the beginning and go slide by slide, because each one is a different category, and we could have conversation on the second run-through. Does that sound logical?
Sounds perfect.
Cool. So next slide. Keeping in mind, this is to help inform the council as they create an ordinance that would not go into effect until next year's dining season. We seem to have a habit of waiting till spring to make this happen. I know that our businesses would like to see it happen in the fall so they can plan better, so we're kind of trying to get on this summer so that something can get put into an ordinance and let us move forward on a really early basis on this. Next slide. So we're looking at a number of things, the safety and the flow of the vehicular and the pedestrian traffic. I know the council had a hard time with standards of visual appropriateness for the streetscape, so we're going to give some ideas on that they can use as references. We're looking to create outdoor dining spaces easily usable by people with disabilities. And though we're not going to specify an actual fee number, we can help create a framework of reference for the fee committee to look at. The first thing we looked at was traffic. The planning board did do their end-of-the-year document. They made recommendations. We're kind of rolling with their same recommendations and not making any changes there. The one-way street recommendation and the two-way street recommendation. So that's kind of sitting as is. Abutter approvals, the only one I could find this year, there may be others, is, and I'll give you examples on these slides as we go through. Jumpin' Jays is in front of the tattoo shop. He would need, and I hope has, full approval of the tattoo shop. That would stay in place, that front footage you only have directly in front of your shop, not in front of anyone else's shop. And the length of the season that is happening this year is May 1 to Indigenous Peoples' Day. Everyone seems happy with that. We weren't offering to make any changes on that one. There's a lot to look at on fees. This number, like I said, isn't going to come from us. It's going to come from the City Council Fee Committee. We're putting recommendations out here, things they need to look at. We think there should be uniform pricing per square foot of usable city space, whether it's sidewalk, parking spaces, or loading zones. And just a reminder, no fractional parking spaces allowed. So that would be if you have a half a parking space in front of your shop and the other half is in front of your abutter, you can't use that half of a parking space. We're full parking spaces only. But we would have the square footage of that parking space be what the pricing is coming from. We'd like the fee committee to look at the lost parking revenue and the cost of the Jersey barrier installation and storage. But we also recognize that when you look at the parking revenue numbers from 2020 until today, every year there are significant increases. So this program is not negatively impacting the overall revenue number. The city continues to be popular. People continue to park. Another consideration for the fee committee is the value of a parking space from May 1 to October 9, which is this year's dates, October 9, is about $3,517. We assume that we recover a portion of that if the driver parks at, say, Foundry Garage. They're going to pay $1 an hour instead of the $2 an hour on the street, but we're still recouping some of that. This year, just for reference, our permit fees are going to come in at around $80,000, and it looks like we're losing about 30 parking spaces this year to accommodate dining permits. And next slide. So then this is sort of a whole new category, the design standards, and we feel like the design standards maybe aren't going to be baked into the ordinance. This is kind of up for discussion, but it feels like to put that in the ordinance, something that as our streetscapes change every year, we don't want the city council to have to go back and change an ordinance every year to accommodate something that's shifting on the sidewalk, or the master plan happens, or just needs change. So the thought is that we would have a design standards document that rides along with this, but is not part of an ordinance. It's just referenced by the ordinance saying, you will abide by the design standards document. And then that, as I understand, that makes it a little more fluid and a little more easy to have us morph the thing. And so for design standards, again, we're looking to regulate safety and flow of pedestrian traffic. We want to define a standard of visual appropriateness, and again, create outdoor dining spaces easily usable by people with disabilities. So the first thing that we looked at is furniture. Not many changes here. We're just looking for sturdy tables, kind of logical things. Tables made of metal or finished-grade wood, sturdy recycled materials. Tables should not exceed 30 inches in height. We are looking for tables that can be used by people with disabilities, either by using movable seating, a 19-inch deep tabletop overhang, that's an ADA requirement, or a table that has a space for a wheelchair. And we'd like to see no advertisements or logos on umbrellas. The sidewalk barriers, these this is not street, this is just sidewalk people. We want to see sturdy barriers like the freestanding sectional fencing, stanchions with rope or chain. If there's an opening, like you see in the top picture, the access to the dining space should be no less than 44 inches. I think everyone in town complies with that. It makes for very nice two-way traffic of pedestrians. And we're looking to see materials that are meant to be barriers, not 5-gallon buckets or tires or pallets or things like that. I don't think we're seeing any of that in town, but not a bad idea to just put this in the design standards so that we prevent that from happening in the future. Then the next category is barriers used for parking spaces and travel lanes. This is primarily jerseys, though we do allow some other alternate barriers. They would need approval from the city. Planters can go on top of them.
All right, you wanna go back?
Yeah, go back to that. And there's safety standards on these. You know, so I know that some of our dining areas wish that they didn't, as in this picture, I wish we didn't have to have barriers the whole length of that we could do something prettier. This is a city safety issue. It's not going to be the restaurant's decision. So each individual restaurant will be evaluated for safety, whether they can have something different like Massimo has, or something like jerseys like in this picture. Okay, next one, platforms and parklets. We are advising or recommending that platforms or parklets be used in every dining space that's in a travel lane or a parking space. And what we're looking for here is to have our downtown, rather than looking like we're dining in parking spaces, we're creating extended sidewalks. And it starts to inform us what our downtown master plan might be thinking about as they consider extended sidewalks. The other thing, when you add a platform in here, you've made this equitable for people of all abilities. A person using a wheelchair has no problem accessing these platformed or parklet spaces. The platforms and parklets need to be flush with the curb, no step up or down. Build them out of something durable, and any spaces higher than 36 inches, as we require today, would need to be something primarily transparent or see-through. And that's basically it. So if we roll back to the beginning of it, and maybe, Phil, maybe I lob this back to you to be our MC, and talk about the specifics of each one of these categories, I guess starting with traffic.
Sure. So I think one of the things we heard fairly clearly was that, and this is in the planning's report back to the council, safety is a main issue, so we didn't look to make any changes where one-way streets needed to maintain at least one full travel lane, and two-way streets needed to maintain two travel lanes. So in other words, we wouldn't be recommending the reversal or closure of one lane on a currently two-lane street. I don't think that, not a leap to say that, but I think there were certain instances we had heard of, so I certainly open that up for comment, questions from anyone on the commission. The one asterisk that I will say is one-way streets. I believe there's currently an exception if there's less than 2,000 cars a day, a street could be closed. We've lowered that to 1,000. So that could be applicable in select locations, but welcome any comments or questions folks have on that particular topic. Sarah?
Do we know any specific properties that will be impacted based on the reduction from 2,000 to 1,000?
I'm not aware. I don't have official traffic counts, but I think to me that kind of defines that it's immaterial impact to a neighborhood if it's less than that.
Okay.
I think we could.
I don't think it
Survey.
impacts what's been approved today, so I think it wouldn't.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting as we go through, where are we making recommendations that are in keeping with what was either done for this year or previous years, and where are we making changes, and what are the reasons for those changes?
Good recommendation, whatever we present to the council, so impacts from 2023 to.
I'm going to move on from traffic.
Yep. So butter approval, I think that this was pretty clearly a response on our end to issues with friction between retailers and restaurants, I think, and trying to make it fair and preserve visibility. I know it makes for difficult conversations between adjacent business owners if they're maybe in conflict with each other. We certainly recognize that, but want to be as fair as possible. I think there's some businesses that may be open and supportive to that, recognizing that additional foot traffic may benefit them, and also there equally may be folks on the other side that are hampered by that. So that's in this year's policy. We felt that that was pretty important and a big change from the past, and it also prevented additional parking from being taken as other abutters couldn't expand into streetscape that wasn't immediately in front of their storefronts as they extend out through parking and or travel lanes. So feedback, thoughts on that? Sarah first.
I think based upon the statements, anything that requires approvals, reviews, et cetera, from the city would have to be renewed on an annual basis. Is that correct? We should be specific
So
about that.
a butter-
Approval.
right, a butter approval
Right,
should be on an
right,
annual
that would be
basis.
season to season.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. And that would provide, that makes it kind of a living document, so you could have a tenant that moves out and feels differently than.
Yeah, I think anything where, like, city has to approve materials, a butter has to approve space, any sort of approvals that are necessary as a result of applying the ordinance should be specified that they need to be approved on an annual basis.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if Ann had that in the slide, but that was one. I think that's currently part of procedure, is that someone has to apply for their seasonal permit and pay the fee, and then would have to get an inspection by the city, ensuring that they comply with the plan that was approved at the city, so for layout, ADA compliance, et cetera. So that would be subject to annual approval and annual inspection to operate.
Correct.
Councilor Lombardi.
Yeah, Councilor Lombardi?
Yes, one of the things that the council had a discussion about were, other than restaurants, and the availability to retail stores having the ability to use space for their business. And I don't know if the committee looked at that at all.
Great question. I had the same thought, and I believe with the abutter approval, this would prevent restaurants from taking over space in front of a retailer if they wanted to be able to utilize that space, but that would be done via a separate vehicle that already exists, and that's a sidewalk obstruction permit. Did I say that right?
Sidewalk, yep. And
Yes.
I'm going to think out loud for a moment and say that if a retail shop wanted to tie up a parking space in the same way that outdoor dining does, I don't see that there's any issue with that. We would allow for that, correct?
Well, I think if it's not written down someplace and city council says that retailers should be treated similarly and have the same rights to lease a space,
apply for it, sure.
I think language should be put in so that it's crystal clear to people,
Right.
Agreed. Yeah,
right?
yeah, I mean, this is very specific to outdoor dining.
Right.
That's why I
Right.
brought that up.
Yeah, so I think we viewed the task as an outdoor dining specific task, but the question did come up. I think if we wanted to formalize and fold that in, I'd certainly put that back to the group. We didn't really look to create this as an all-encompassing
Right.
retailer business citywide effort, really specific to dining, because approval and compliance, I think, would be much different. But further feedback, or Jacob?
Do all these approvals also follow the same rules for off-street? So if they're on Commercial Alley or if they're down the sidewalk near the whale lot, is that the same kind of thing? Like, you can't take a storefront's business if the restaurant is there? Is that the same kind of approval process, or just for streets?
I think it's universal, so if you're applying for an outdoor permit, it would be the same. It just depends which,
Right, they're both city property, so you have to go through the process. And if specifically for outdoor dining, whether it's on a sidewalk or on a street, the abutter approval is in place, and that's what we're recommending.
This is for first floor only? What if someone has a business on the second floor?
yeah. Great, and very fair question. That did come up after we kind of formulated the initial response, and I think,
In theory, it should
Put it
be
back to the
permittable. It should be. And there can also, we also have living examples of where more than one business is
Kind
are
of
sharing.
Yeah.
Cheese Louise and Summer Sessions, Elephantine and Cava, those are the two that come to mind, but neither of those include second-floor businesses. But I think if it's something a second-floor business wants to pursue, we can certainly permit that.
and are you saying that in terms of usage of space or abutter approval?
Usage.
Probably
I
both,
guess either of them. I was thinking usage.
Yep.
Somebody wants to cut hair down in a parking space, maybe they want to do that. I don't know.
Be cheaper than renting a,
There's nothing in the Portsmouth Feed Co. reroute space now, but there also has to be consideration for entrances to residential access to. So
Okay.
we are, when we inspect and approve plans, we are mindful of that. You want to move on? We got
Length
on.
of season?
yeah, well, any more questions or comments on that, or?
How about length of season?
So length of season, I think, based on what has been seen so far this year and past several years, I think from a seasonality perspective and in order to preserve the city's ability to clear the streets and be able to maintain them in winter season, and based on utilization of the restaurants, we're not recommending any material change to what currently exists. I think that's important given winters here, but I think there was a concept asked about for kind of year-round. I think that has issues in terms of what we're recommending here for parklets and requirements if you're occupying street space or anything off sidewalk. But certainly put that to the group for commentary on time of year.
Yeah, I guess it's my view that we should be looking at this specifically for the outdoor dining period, this May 1 into October. But I think the point was well made that there is a separate issue to look at, it's sort of year-round activation. But I would recommend that we look at that as a separate working group.
Great. Sarah?
I was going to make a similar suggestion where there are areas that we believe are out of scope with the tasks that we have. We may want to have an additional considerations that supplements this, that says exactly that.
If I can add to the conversation, when the Market Square revisioning effort starts to take shape, when we master plan the Market Square area, I would think it would be appropriate to take up this consideration and to have EDC representation on that as part of that steering committee. So let's keep that in mind.
Thank you. Any more comment on that? Otherwise, okay, move on. So fee consideration. I think we kind of view this from a holistic perspective on the positive contribution outdoor dining makes, but also recognizing that taking a parking space offline for this period obviously impacts the revenue we're collecting for parking for that specific space. I think it's something that we kind of grapple with, and the way we're approaching this is that this fee consideration is something we feel best determined on an annual basis by the fee committee in recognition of recommendations we're making in determining what that figure is. I think it needs to be fluid. You know, we live in an inflationary time, and I think in terms of balancing everything, that group would be best suited to make that determination rather than formalize it in an ordinance and have that be a static number or have to have that be amended every year. So, and then with that, thinking that uniform pricing would be the most equitable way to approach it for any on-street or any parking space usage, travel lane usage, and/or sidewalk usage. So we're also getting an equal benefit to sidewalk space being used, which also further offsets any perceived deficit for lack of parking income for a parking space if somebody's using the sidewalk. So I think this is probably one of the bigger changes, but also helps provide some uniformity overall throughout the city to everybody, and certainly recognize that the fees we have in place date back to, I believe, the original outdoor cafe policy from 2012. So certainly has been a time where we've allowed groups to benefit from the reduced fees over the course of COVID in response to economic climate. But I think at this point, we feel like there should be some increase in ensuring that we're more covered for that parking space being offline during the season, and also the city's cost for Jersey barrier relocation and additional time for inspections and other implementation and tracking of this on a permanent basis.
Quick clarification, the next to last bullet point, is that 3517 an all-in number for lost revenue for those parking spaces?
That's an average among the different zones, as I understand it.
That's not the total of lost revenue for the parking, or is it?
It's per space.
It's per
Per
space.
space, okay.
And that's average between the zones.
Got it, thank you.
Because it recognizes there's turnout. Well,
Yep, understood.
Ben's got his crazy formulaic way of figuring things out.
Yeah, but it's the different zones for that time frame. It's the best.
Yeah, I just wanted to look at the total number, so that's 111.5 in terms of dollar amount, and I was looking for the offset between permitting and, alternate parking.
For what it's worth, there were typically 59 to 60 some odd parking spaces utilized in the last few years. Right now, by my count, there are 33 spaces that are utilizing outdoor dining, so that's a reduction.
And to be fair, right, the 3517 helps offset the loss of parking.
Right.
But it doesn't reimburse the city for staff time.
Right.
To do inspections, review, registrations, and/or install or remove barriers.
Correct. And parking revenue goes to the parking fund, and the other items are paid for out of the general fund.
Right, so if there's discussion about, well, it seems high, or it seems, it doesn't fully reimburse the city for its total cost or lost revenue.
Yep.
Council Lombardi?
I don't have the numbers, but it seems to me that in Ben's presentation of the revenues, that our revenues increased during this period last year. Parking revenues increased last year in spite of losing revenues for specific parking spaces. So people were diverted to garages. It draws people in.
It was also the first full year of stay and pay,
Yeah.
where you could stay where you were, but you had to increase what you paid.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Really good point. Yeah, Bob?
Yeah, I think the problem is in trying to figure out a cost, that we're just looking at, what do you lose for a parking space? But I think maybe the bigger issue, and what we might hear from later today, is that, what's the cost to the people who lose the parking spaces, whether it's another retailer, or it's someone that lives up on the third floor and they can't park there anymore, and it's sort of like parking is kind of the common area of the condominium complex of downtown, and so if a number of residents or occupants are using more of that common area, but everyone's paying for it, it's just, there's an imbalance there, and I don't know how you charge for that or calculate that.
Andy?
One of the problems, I'm kind of piggybacking on what Bob said, is Jersey barriers are incredibly not movable.
Yeah.
They
That's
are
the point.
installed
That
and
is the
then
point.
they're removed. So a restaurant or retail, or whoever's using it can't remove the Jersey barriers when they close. They can't remove them on Tuesday, or Monday and Tuesday when they're closed. I think what Bob and I are both saying is there's this lost opportunity that can't be distilled down into fee considerations and what's going on. Along with that, I think May 1st is probably, looking at this, is probably a generous starting date too. I spend a lot of time outdoors. May 1st is not a great time to be outdoors in New Hampshire. We could probably push that back to something closer to June. But anyways.
Any more thoughts on the parking impact aspect of that, Ann?
Well, I always see the perimeter parking, meaning like Foundry Garage or what you're pushed to, makes people walk a little more. And I know when I walk down Congress Street, if I park at Foundry, I'm popping into the retail shops more. So that walkability that we're pushed into when we're not parking in front of the store we're going to sometimes makes dollars come out of my wallet. So we need to consider that too. I know cities see that as best practice, to not put your parking garage right in the center of town. You put it on the edge. So, a lot of balls in the air.
That's a personal spending problem, man.
Well, there's that.
But, excuse me, comment though would be Ann did a lot of research on this. Ann, could you speak to what other communities pay or charge for parking in their outdoor dining, I should say, what their fee structure was?
Is Anna Howard still on?
I think Anna
Did she
did.
peel off? She looked, I don't have it in front of me, she looked at 4 or 5
Yes.
communities
Okay, it was Anna Howard.
to sort of compare. Do you have that in
Yeah,
front of you,
Anna's there.
Anna? And we
I don't
were-
have it in front of me, Ann, but I remember square foot fee was between 2 and 10, depending on our town. I think we looked at 5 or 6 towns.
I think Portland, Maine was I think it was an $80 permit fee and $2 a square foot.
I've got it here. Application fee is $100, $5 a square foot for Newburyport. Portland is $84 plus $2 a square foot. On public property in a city park, same permit, $630 per square foot. Baltimore, no more than $10 per square foot. Boston, your firstborn, oh, sorry, I misread that. $199 or $399 each month, depending on whether the business has a liquor license. So certainly, under any circumstance, we're on the very, very low end of some of the numbers, but, kind of in line with, say, Newburyport.
I would make the recommendation we include that spreadsheet with the considerations so that they can look and see what.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Jacob had a question or comment?
I was just, it seems that parking and access to those spaces seems to be the largest concern of the retailers. And personally, as a downtown resident who does the circle looking for parking because I don't have parking, I fully understand that. And I think the most frustration comes from the time when the restaurant is closed. And if you have an early morning appointment at one of those stores at 8 a.m., parking should be easy, right? It's easy at 8 a.m. Sure, 2 or 3 o'clock on a Saturday, you're not finding parking downtown anyway. And I also think that if you need to go in and look for a specific store, if you can't find parking within 20 minutes, you're just going to leave town. I don't see going to Foundry Garage and walking in. I just, as I've done the loops, and I'm like, I'm just going to go park somewhere way far away. It's not worth it for me. So that seems to be the largest point of frustration. And I just say I would agree with both the comments on this side about the dates. And I wish Jersey barriers were temporary. You could move them back and forth and kind of make it more fluid. But obviously, that's not the point of them. So.
Sarah?
I think the only other question related to parking is there consideration for leaving a certain percentage of parking spots available for parking in an area? I don't know if that's already part of the decision-making process. Like, would we allow, say, full abutter approval, full restaurant purchase of the space for the time frame to take up all parking on a street? Or should there be some percentage that is left?
I think it's fair to say we considered when loading zones were displaced, but I don't think the consideration was for making sure a percentage of parking spaces.
Or some
was kept in
availability.
a certain area, correct.
That might be a way to alleviate some of the shared concerns around residents or retailers if we ensure there's some degree of parking that remains as a result of the program.
Good comment. Thank you.
Want me to keep going?
Yep.
Oh, it's sleeping now, hold on. Oh, now we're flying. Okay.
I have feedback on this one.
Go ahead.
I don't think it's the EDC's purview to make recommendations on design standards outside of traffic or pedestrian flow, safety, or accessibility. I would be comfortable with shoulds and should language as opposed to must and shall. Interested in other feedback on that, unless it's already prescribed in another ordinance or another area that's governed by city policy.
Can jump in. I agree with Sarah on that, and I also agree with what Ann was saying about having this be an exhibit or outside of the ordinance so that it can be revised. I'd really like to hear what the HDC feels about this whole deck of slides. I used to deal with the HDC a fair amount on downtown construction projects and additions. They're typically small projects, and I can remember being on field trips at night discussing the tone and color of awnings that were going on building. I mean, incredibly detailed discussions about design and design standards, and a lot of times, so a lot of this was in like the 2010 area. A lot of times they were very subjective decisions. They're extremely restrictive. If we all stood up and walked downtown right now to Market Square, the first thing you're going to see is a Palapa straw umbrella and a Bud Light umbrella behind it. Welcome to Portsmouth. So I think we have to have this in here, and I think there are a lot of restaurants and retailers that have done a fantastic job, but it's kind of like we have a bunch of A, fantastic job, and then we have a lot of D as well, and we don't have enough that are more towards the A, so somehow this has got to get in there, but the HDC and our land use boards make projects better in Portsmouth, and though it's can be cumbersome to go through those boards, they make better projects, and I can't believe we're seeing what we're seeing today with an HDC intact the way we have it today. It is so far out from what I was used to when I was going through those HDC reviews and field trips. It's a complete departure. It's nowhere close.
Thank you. Ann?
I thank you for that. Honestly, knowing full well the ramifications of HDC in our downtown, it is what made me realize we need to have design standards. Most of the bullet points you see in here weren't just cooked up in a vacuum. Most towns that have outdoor dining have a design standards document, and the language that are, you know, it's loose and vague. We're not telling you what color your table needs to be, but we're telling you that it needs to accommodate a person who uses a wheelchair. These are all things that many design standards in many cities have, including historic cities similar to us. A lot of this came from Alexandria, Virginia, their design standards, and I think that's a pretty similar downtown, heavily touristed, beautifully historic. How do you keep that, our streetscapes, and not have the, you know, the logoed umbrellas or enclosures made out of pallets? That's the goal here. So it is a fine line of what can we ask people to do without saying you need a Queen Anne leg on your picnic table. We're not asking for that. So it is more keeping it safe, keeping it accessible, and making it be out of materials that we like to see these things made out of.
Would the design standards apply to privately owned property? I'm thinking about like the decks, if they have logoed umbrellas Are they permitted to use them because they own the space as opposed to city space? Like, those are the considerations that I think we have to think about and not make undue hardship for folks that take advantage of this as opposed to those that have their own property.
Right.
So if we are going to have design standards for outdoor space, I feel like they should be equitably applied.
I think our thought and intent, and anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but these design standards would be specific to people seeking for a permit annually to utilize public outdoor space. So if somebody owned their own deck or patio and has certain furniture that is sufficient and they have a permit to operate on their own private property, that.
But if we're talking about HDC standards,
Right.
those apply to both. So that's why I just want us to be careful about where we're prescriptive and where we're not.
Yeah. Thanks.
Moving on.
Yeah, sure. Furniture, I think to Ann's point and comments made so far, really best practices and standards. I don't think much to add or say, but certainly if there's questions or comments.
Moving on to
Move
barriers.
on. So barriers, I think one thing we heard often was the appetite for some best design standards and distaste for Jersey barriers, and also desire for uniformity, given location in the Historic District Commission in our historic city. So I think this just is intended to provide some framework and definition around that. Any questions or comments? And again, this would be in a recommendation for design standards, not part of the formal ordinance piece.
I think from my perspective, I think, and as Ann knows, she and I, we're on the reopening committee, and, you know, and we're dealing with Jersey barriers to get everything in place. While she knows a great deal more about it than I do, I've certainly had enough of a taste. I think, to your point, Andrew, we're starting with, from an aesthetic perspective, we're starting with a baseline of a really ugly, big, you know, concrete block that's primary goal is to keep, you know, cars from jumping off into other lanes. So, I mean, it's kind of a no pun intended, a low barrier to entry. But I think that if we could ask the city, I mean, I don't even know what mechanism, to see what kinds of alternatives there might be to provide adequate pedestrian and dining safety that isn't this gigantic poured concrete, often chipped block. I think we did a great job, and the CTE program did a fabulous job as well with the planters, and, you know, there was, you know, legitimate euphoria and enthusiasm during COVID times for all of this opening up. But now if you start to walk down the street, you know, you've got the reflectors, some of them are dangling off, some of them are not there. You know, they're chipped. They're a nice color, but certainly they're not, you know, I wouldn't call them aesthetically pleasing. I would call them, you know, practical. And so, you know, I wonder if there is something in a longer-term study to look at that might be an alternative.
I think it's fair to say that the restaurants that are obligated to use the most protective barriers, in this case, the not-so-attractive concrete ones, are the same groups that are looking for some permanence to outdoor dining, and perhaps once this is established, they will make an investment that replaces them with something that our traffic folks and our planning and our inspection folks are comfortable with from a safety perspective, but also look a whole lot better. So I think it's a chicken and egg thing.
Agreed.
Ann?
Our long-term goal, and this will be the master planning of downtown, the long-term goal is to readdress how we do dining in a perhaps expanded sidewalks kind of way.
Right.
And fingers crossed, lose the Jersey barriers, all of them. No one really loves them.
Right.
They do their job. That's
Do their
it.
job. I agree.
I
Andy?
think just a general comment, and along that line, I'm really glad you mentioned Alexandria. There are so many other municipalities going through this, not just nationally, but globally. And when we get to 10-year outlooks and master plans and 20-year outlooks, I really would encourage council to look at great examples that we have in Europe and Sicily and Edinburgh, Scotland. There's so many places for inspiration for streetscape, outdoor dining. A lot of them are in Europe. London has some great examples of that. But I would encourage us all, especially council, to not think that Portsmouth is the only one having this problem. And we probably with time, we can design our way out of Jersey barriers.
Yep, great point.
And I think currently they're required only on the leading edge where there is a requirement. Is that accurate?
No.
Depends on traffic flow.
Depends on
I
the
think there's traffic flow
location.
things
Yeah.
too.
Around the
If you're,
phone.
if you're abutting a traffic
The
light.
big guide that I feel like we've used since 2020, and that our planning department respects a lot, is NACTO, National Association of City Traffic Officials.
Something like that.
That might be it. And they have books on parklets, and all of their studies are 8, 10 years old. Their books have been around for a while. They've been doing parklets for a while. Originally, the parklets were more like seating areas. It was 2020 when the parklets started to become dining areas, but all of their safety studies were in place. And when you go to those, they are very prescribed on the leading edge, what needs to be there, how high it needs to be, and then a lot of the long edge things, they really will tell you traffic flow, when do you need a jersey, when do you not. And I think that Portsmouth always leans on the, let's be sure it's safe. You know, they expand upon, let's not take a chance here. You know, Massimo doesn't have jerseys on his long edge, but Goat and Jumpin' Jays do. And that's the safety standards coming in.
Okay. Next slide. Okay, so barrier heights. Much of the conversation or commentary we just had. We can go to the next.
While we're on this, I just want to mention that if you're wondering where the heck the plantings are in the barrier planters, they will be completed today, and there are far fewer that are being used and relying on the city to provide the plant. So increasingly more restaurants are looking to plant their own. So, but the planters that are accepting city plants will be done today.
Great. And
I should probably make a height comment here. A jersey barrier is 32 inches, and the planter is 14. So I thought about this morning. Yeah, you know, maybe that needs to be baked into this somewhere, that.
So not 6 feet, something less than 6 feet.
Well, I think I have 6 feet. That came from some other city somewhere. 6 feet is the greenery. How tall can your plants get?
Right.
How far off the sidewalk? I don't know that in New Hampshire we get plants that are that tall, and maybe that doesn't even need to be there. We're not that successful. That could be in Florida that your plants get that tall. But maybe we need to include the height dimension for the planter boxes.
Yeah. Okay.
Good.
Those planter boxes, by the way, can be freestanding. That's the way the CDE designed them. So someday, when there are no jerseys, we can repurpose those planter boxes on our sidewalks as freestanding planters,
Cool.
which is cool.
Great. Okay, so platforms, parklets, this is a place where we do see some change from what exists now, and we kind of spoke to that a little bit when we ran through the slides. But I think this really, to us, made it feel more intentional. We recognized there would be additional cost incurred for folks, and open to comments on that, and certainly would welcome feedback from those who would be impacted that don't currently have them. But we feel that it adds a much more intentionality and some additional uniform throughout the city. And I think we've seen the implementation of those has been very well received by the community, but welcome any additional comments. And one other thing I will call out that was sort of a change. So you'll see the recommendation in the third bullet here. Platforms and parklets would be limited to an 8-foot width from the curb. So I think where we would have a change from what exists now would be along the Thirsty Moose on Congress Street. So the intent would be to maybe be able to preserve some additional
Parallel
pull-in parking. Right now, it's limited to parallel parking, so it would limit their usage from the full width of those spaces as they're drawn, but may be able to get some additional spaces back. So, comments, questions?
I would say one of the more elegant outdoor dining situations is, is the one in the lower right, which is in front of Von Sallen.
Impressive.
And it's very and my quick comment on that is, it would be a wonderful opportunity to do like a post-occupancy study next year on the raised platform, so that could inform the master planning for where the permanent, much like we're doing with some of the traffic flow patterns where there's temporary bollards that then change traffic flow. And if it doesn't work, you can take out those traffic bollards, and or there are bike lanes on Middle Street changed several times, and there was the ability to do that again because of temporary bollards. But I think the way that post-occupancy study would happen would probably involve video cameras and how to study where people naturally congregate and how they flow on the sidewalk. For instance, that the closest part of the brick sidewalk to the deck, that might be kind of a harsh edge. Maybe that needs to be backed off. But you can tell just by the way people flow around spaces like that. But this is a great opportunity to do it. Whereas I think it's less of an opportunity this year when we're still, at grade, eating on asphalt and with Jersey barriers around us. This kind of doesn't feel like as natural or comfortable condition, but some of these other ones are.
Isn't that bottom right one also shared with the press room
It
as
is.
well?
Yeah,
Yeah.
press room.
Yeah.
That's another good thing, right?
Yeah,
And the
so
one
it's
in
got
the-
that, right.
On the upper left
Left is
is
shared.
Cheese Louise and Noah Cafe,
Mm-hmm.
and they're sharing that space. They were each applying separately and then got talking and realized they could make a nicer situation if they shared the space.
Right.
I think they're separating it with just stanchions and chain or something
Yep.
in there.
But they also serve different hours of the day, so there'll be times when it's exclusively one and not the other.
It's going to, and we can't inform this piece of it to restaurants, but it's really nice when a space is activated, like Press Room and Von Sallen's the perfect example, that they go from early in the morning with Von Sallen up through the evening hours with Press Room. So you don't have a time of day when you have stacks of chairs that are chained up waiting for 5 o'clock to open. And that's what you're going to see at Cheese Louise and Noah. I think Noah is more the breakfast and lunch, and Cheese Louise, they have breakfast, but they're heavier lunch and into, I'm told, quite late night, I think. You can get yourself a grilled cheese.
I think there was a big frustration with Rudy's, if you
Yeah.
can all remember back when. There seemed to be
AstroTurf.
my and a ball, chairs
Yep.
and tables, and I think we're trying to avoid that.
Trying to avoid that.
Yep.
And the accessibility. My group of followers that use wheelchairs, they are anxiously awaiting to see something like this happen so that they can get into every dining space in Portsmouth, which would be really cool.
So I guess, based upon this recommendation, are there any spaces where Jersey barriers would be the only option? Or is this, I'm not.
On at least one edge, yes.
Okay. So does the press room Von Sallen space have a Jersey barrier?
No.
Does not.
Okay.
I thought they had
Last
one on the
year, it was an
leading
orange
edge.
and white. It was one of the
One that's
water-filled ones.
further down by the bridge?
Yeah, them on the
On the
leading
leading
edge
edge,
where
they
the direction cars are coming.
Yeah,
Oh,
Okay.
that would be the leading edge. Ken,
Yes,
right?
yeah, no, you're right.
yes.
I was,
Last year, it was the plastic water-filled
Yeah.
one.
Yep,
And
with
I
the googly
don't-
eyes. But this year,
Yes.
it does not.
So that might be good to add in here, because it wasn't clear to me that Jersey barriers are still part of the platform or parklet requirement.
It's only where the traffic engineer feels that it's
Okay.
appropriate,
Yeah, maybe we need a bullet on just that.
on where those are.
Right.
Where the lead, I think we have it on the slide before where it's there. So it's the same thing, that third bullet.
But you can't cover the Jersey barriers.
You can cover the Jersey
Any
barriers, if you're so
further
inclined.
thoughts, comments on the
That's what Cup of Joe
the
did.
recommended change on?
I'd say it's fair to say that this is a good example of the Jersey barriers being in effect because the restaurant didn't seek to purchase new barriers, right? It may support use at the leading edge, but not all the way around.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
All right, that's it.
So that was a lot covered. I appreciate all the thoughts and feedback. We're missing some other members of the commission today. I think there was some additional comments and recommendations we could supplement and circle back to the full PC. I would like to hear from the public on what we discussed on this as well, and have a chance to come back as a full commission and review this and confirm with some of the comments and questions brought up today, and take into consideration what we're going to hear this morning and what we may hear outside of this meeting as follow-up prior to making a formal recommendation to the council. So there will be another opportunity for us to convene and discuss. Any further comment before I invite our guests up to speak?
One more comment.
Yeah.
One of the invisible problems of the outdoor dining and the decks, the recommendation on the at-grade decks is delivery, trash, mail delivery, emergency vehicles, and the patterns. And that's something that, downtown developers have always had to answer to for land use boards. And I think, I just haven't seen it talked about a lot. FedEx, UPS, how do you get an ambulance into Market Square with Jersey barriers on both sides? And I don't have an answer for that other than it's not being paid attention to, I think. And I think it's real.
Yeah.
Especially short or mid-size and longer truck deliveries are really difficult.
Ann?
I can speak a little bit to the safety end of it. I know that in past years, when Cup of Joe has done dining in the street, which I don't know if she's doing that
No, she's
this
doing it
year.
on, will she?
She was waiting for Market Square Day
Okay.
to come and go. and the work-
She's had to have the really attractive plastic water-filled barriers. And that was explained to me that if there were a fire in Commercial Alley, the firemen would take an axe to those barriers, the water would be gone, and those barriers would be out. So the city tested that and tested the turning radiuses. They weren't what they wanted them to be, and that's why Cup of Joe gets the plastic barriers. So I think they do look at that if they have an access issue, you're going to see the plastic ones.
Great. Thank you, Andy. Good point.
Chairman,
Everett?
the other point we made was the purpose for reducing the size or the depth of the space to 8 feet was to reduce the choke points like you see.
Right.
Because when there's delivery trucks and parking in Market Square, that space really gets choked down. So that frees up, I think it's 8 feet more, so that we can effectively get fire engines and life safety through there.
Great. All right, thanks, everybody. So at this point, I would welcome anyone up to speak specific to the outdoor dining. We'll have general public comment afterwards. We have just one other item on the agenda we'll cover. So thank you for joining us. It's nice to have some guests
Mr.
today.
Chairman, we have a hand on Zoom.
Great.
Maybe I'll go with that. I think it's Liza. I know it's Liza. It might be Liza Hewitt. Go ahead, Liza.
Hi,
Good morning.
my name is Liza Hewitt. I live here in Portsmouth. My concerns are really focused around safety. One spot in particular, but another spot as well. That corner of Congress Middle and Maplewood is an absolute nightmare. I drive through there probably 5 or 6 times a week. I'm concerned for pedestrian safety. I know there was concerns aside from outdoor dining about pedestrian safety in that location. You've now closed down sidewalks and parts of streets for the store that's being renovated there at the corner. And then you have on the other side as you know, that lane is blocked off. And so the Jumpin' Jays has put up, really some of them are going to be trees before long. The site distance is absolutely totally blocked as you are coming into that intersection from Congress Street. You cannot see who's stepping out into the street to cross the street. There is so much going on in that intersection that I don't even know where to look. You've got music from the GOAT. You've got trees blocking the site at Jumpin' Jays. You have the construction on the other side of the street. You have people crossing every which way, not looking at walk signs or anything else. But even if they did, if they cross out from behind where those trees are planted and bushes, you cannot see people coming. You know, it's a quite honestly an absolute disaster. And I brought this up at Parking, Traffic, and Safety 2 weeks ago at their meeting in June. Nothing's been done, so obviously my comments were probably disregarded. But I think you need to look at that because, you know, you're saying on the one hand that safety is your primary concern. And I can't imagine anybody would have planned that intersection with those trees at Jumpin' Jays on purpose. You know, along with the fact that he didn't even open up the area except for planting the trees until recently, so it was sitting there blocked for 3 weeks and nobody was even eating there is a whole nother thing. But I would urge you to look at, you know, I'm hearing that, you know, you're talking about the height, you know, you're talking about 3 feet unless there's, you know, you can see through it. You can't see through trees. You can't see through bushes. And by the end of, or the middle of the summer, it's going to be completely filled in. And I can understand why people do not want to order dinner with a side of exhaust fumes on Congress Street. But you've got to look at the safety in that intersection. The other area that I brought up to PTS, which is less of a concern, but still a concern, is coming out of Penhallow and the way those screens at the press room, and I know you just all talked about how wonderful it is, and it looks beautiful, I will say that, but you cannot see what is coming down Daniel Street there off the bridge. And the sight distance is terrible. I've been on my bike there. I have to get almost out into the intersection in order to see whether there's a car coming. There's no stop sign there, so there's no reason for a car coming down Daniel Street to stop, and they fly down that street. So, you know, you've got to look at what is being used for screens on top of these Jersey barriers, because I've heard all kinds of discussions, and those screens or screening are not 3 feet tall. They're just not, and they're not that tall almost anywhere around the city. They're much higher than that. So I would urge you to put something in there. Please get somebody to listen immediately. I'm not talking about next year. I'm talking about like yesterday, especially at that intersection. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Liza.
Where would you like?
Wherever you can, you want to come up here?
Choose a spot with a microphone.
Thank you. Page Trace, 27 Hancock Street. You've spoken a lot this morning about uniformity and safety, and those are very important. You've also spoken about ADA, which is also important. But you haven't spoken about equity. You haven't spoken, and I look forward to the amount, this committee spending the same amount of time for the merchants as you do the restaurants. You talk about the restaurants being the economic drivers of the city. Now, obviously, I enjoy the restaurants. And no one will refute the fact that we love our city and the restaurants. but the person staying at the Sheraton or the Hilton Garden Inn is not coming just to eat a grilled cheese sandwich. With all due respect, they're coming also to spend their hard dollars to buy a La Crusette, a book. God forbid we should still read. They are spending their dollars to try and find a parking space to go see a show at one of several theaters. We're blessed with a city of multiple things to do, and we spend this committee's time on simply restaurants. You know, COVID was an awful experience, and I was on council, in full disclosure, during COVID. People like Alan Gould and Karen Kennard and multiple others, Sarah LaChance, had the brilliance to come up with the idea of outdoor dining to help the restaurants. But somewhere along the line, the equity got lost. The activation of how thrilling it is to be able to go and pull into a parking space and shop at a bookstore, or buy a piece of jewelry, or a dress, or a pair of pants. People come to this city also to shop. So I would hope at some point we focus on the equity of both. It's not about giving up one to make the other better. It should be, what can we do for the merchants? Because pretty soon, you're all going to be worried about whether there are logos on umbrellas, and there's going to be a closed storefront in front of that umbrella with a logo. So that's not going to do much for the dining appetite to look into a dead, empty window, because a poor merchant can't get somebody to shop. Which brings me also to Americans with Disabilities Act, because all of these places that have Jersey barriers, what happened to the handicap parking spaces? Did they get ignored? Because I'm sure there's somebody out there with ADA that would not want to hear that the closest handicap spot to park for someone in a wheelchair to go buy something in a cooking store is 4 blocks away. Or the attitude is, go to Foundry Garage, and you in your wheelchair can find a way up the hill, down Congress Street, to get to the cooking shop. This is wrong, ladies and gentlemen. We have lost sight of the fact that it takes all types of people. It takes multiple pieces of a puzzle to make this city healthy economically. It's not just the person stopping briefly for a hamburger at the Goat. And Mrs. Hewitt is correct, with all due respect, that intersection is a nightmare for any of us, no matter how careful we might be, particularly in a vehicle. Fees. The fees that we are discussing are not including the cost of the city to move the barriers in. They are not including all of you who are on staff, the amount of time that you have spent on this committee agonizing over this. So, with all due respect, the fees have to be equitable. They can't just be for that little parking space, and that should be another story also, because it should be legitimately what that specific parking space costs. If your restaurant is in one area of town and your parking spaces are more expensive, well, that's very unfortunate, but that's what you should be paying. Not an averaged cost at the expense of another restaurant or another merchant. Point of fact, also with the merchants, it should be all direct abutters. Tattoo shop has the Goat and Jumpin' Jays. The fact of the matter is that the Goat takes care of anyone seeing the tattoo shop. It's not McSherry, it's the Goat. And it's probably the same. As far as the HDC goes, HDC and with respect to Counselor Lombardi, he's probably far more aware of this and up on this than I am, but we do not work on color. That is not the purview of the HDC. So is a logoed umbrella currently under the purview of the HDC? No, any more than what color I paint my home in the historic district. So we have to be aware of also the fact that an umbrella is a temporary thing. Now, I happen to agree with the logoed umbrellas, or something that looks like a tiki hut in the middle of God knows where. It's like it's not exactly Portsmouth Historic District. But the conversation should be a work session with the Historic District and maybe this committee as to a more uniform. I understand certain counselors want vibrance, but those counselors also tend to be the newer counselors that are less involved and have been less involved with this city. Perhaps one of those counselors hasn't lived here more than 4 years, as opposed to this particular counselor who was the chair of the HDC. I think we need to find an equitable sort of middle of the road deal with HDC. And I think that's where I'm going to go right now, is that you need to look at the fees and you need to look at the merchants, because the merchants are suffering. And we spend all this time on the economic drivers of the restaurants. And where are the merchants? You know, you close an entire street down for one establishment so that they can have outdoor dining. But you have merchants here today who can't even get their patrons to be able to park to buy something. That's their livelihood. It may not be as pretty as people and vibrant, but they make this city too. So as I said in the beginning, I'm sorry I've been so long-winded, but I'm fairly passionate about the fact that it takes everyone to make this city work, including city staff and a true understanding of what those parking spaces are costing us. Because that's my tax dollars. It's your tax dollars. So let's have a proper price. We are out of COVID, we are out of the emergency situation, and we now need to say, with all due respect, guys, if you're going to inflict and instruct upon the merchants, then there needs to be an equal payback. Thank you ever so much for your time, everyone.
Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Resident Peter Harris. I live at 249 Islington Street. Lived in Portsmouth for a little over 30 years. I'd like to just go back to what Liza Hewitt had said about the intersection of Congress Street and Middle and Woodbury. If there were parking spaces where those Jersey barriers are for the restaurants, they couldn't get up that close to the corner because you're not allowed to have parking spaces there. But by having the Jersey barriers there, which are higher than a car parked, it is a significant block. And the whole thing about turning left or going straight, it's a lot more restricted. That's really one of two of the busiest intersections in the downtown area coming, and that's the one that gets out of downtown versus State and Pleasant Street, where you're coming into downtown. You can't come in at Congress Street, and now you've cut down the lanes from 3 to 2, and it's just a concern. I understand Joanna Kelly, who's on the EDC, isn't here today. I don't know if that's because she couldn't make it or whatnot, but she has voted on outside dining in the city council several times now when they've had meetings. I'd like it noted that she is a direct has a direct financial impact. And it doesn't seem right as a resident to see, I mean, the vote would have passed regardless, but to have her voting, and I shouldn't say single it out to Joanna, to anyone on the city council that owns a restaurant should be involved in making those decisions or having that vote. They should recuse, I would expect. And related to costs, I think there's more than just the parking space, the DPW costs. There is a lot of impact to that, and that I've tried to find out what those costs are. The city is not able to, because they don't collect the data in that way where they can identify it. But I think from a transparency perspective, the city should provide to residents and to the EDC what the actual costs are for putting out outside dining and taking it down. And that, should be part of the fees associated in addition to the parking space revenue lost. There's resident impacts. You've talked about the parking and access to parking for restaurants and how it affects shops, which I think is good. I'm glad it's a kind of healthy discussion to hear this happening. As a resident, when you live, let's say, 4 or 5 blocks out of town, I'm all about walking into town and getting things. But sometimes, like for instance, I don't necessarily want to eat out in downtown because it's too busy. And as a resident, I love going out to the restaurants, but having to come in when it's high tourist season and it's just too much, I'll get to go. Well, I need to park quickly and get something. And so to-go access is, I guess I just need to not get anything from a restaurant in town, it seems, but I'm restricted. This is supporting restaurants in town or in the downtown area, but what about restaurants outside the downtown area? And so it's providing some competition for an advantage to the restaurants in the downtown area versus ones outside. One just applied for outside dining, and they're actually doing all that work themselves. They're outside of town. Anyways, and then lastly, I know on the jersey or the designs and stuff, the height and so on has been discussed. But aren't restaurants aren't allowed to have logos? So why does the GOAT have the GOAT logos on their screens? It doesn't make sense to me. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for commenting. We appreciate it.
Good morning, Peter Huda, 280 South Street. The first thing I'd like to address here, and you asked the public to come and comment, I would be interested to have your documents actually placed online that are going to be discussed, especially in going over an ordinance and the presentation that Ann had put forward today. It's hard to do. You didn't even have a handout here for the public to see. This is a public committee. This is paid for by the citizens of Portsmouth, and I would like to see actually something put online so everybody can review the work that's being done here as we are residents. Happy to make that happen. Happy to make that happen. Thank you. The next thing, since I had worked with Ann previously on the COVID response task force, I think her presentation was great. I thought her questions from last week were great, and I'm glad you acted on this. This is a great first start. The things that I would have comments on, I think Ann had great questions on all of the costs here, and it was kind of ignored. If you need help describing all the costs that would be incurred here, it is not just the parking revenue. It is a lot of costs that are taken up by the staff. The other thing I would like to follow up on that is on the enforcement. Ann had mentioned still at the end of last year or now, there were still three of the businesses that had not met ADA standards. So I would ask our city staff following up on this, and why did that occur? This is a matter of safety, which should be of the utmost importance to all staff. The next thing I thought was a great thing to reduce the sides to 8 foot and recommend that to the city council. I don't think that this committee wants to handle the hot potato of fees. I thought it was a great thing to push it back to the fee committee and deal with this. The support that you might want to be able to give them, though, is the true cost of what outdoor dining costs, both to the revenue hit and the city staff. The other thing that was mentioned last week, that there is still, even after the city had put a deadline on applying for this, there is still businesses coming forward. That is all well and good, but when the city puts a deadline on something, there is a reason. And it's the cost to the city and the cost to the residents. So that I would ask you to consider, consider an additional cost, because the cost should be passed on to somebody who did not comply with the deadlines put on by the city. So I think that's something else you need to put into force. I agree with the discussion on not going into design standards, only for safety as far as this committee goes, and the recommendations. I thought that was a very good discussion. The big thing here is having an all-inclusive discussion. I know this committee basically represents the restaurants, and I go back to the Blue Ribbon Committee, and we had the same concern, and the same concern keeps coming forward, that all restaurants, not just restaurants, all retailers, all service industries downtown should also be represented, whether they belong to the chamber or whether they belong to any other representative group. They need to be represented here. They also pay taxes just like the residents. And I'm counting on a committee like this to actually bring forward and represent everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Stephanie Crawford, and I'm the manager of Clay's. I've been the manager of Clay's Women's Clothing for 13 years. The outdoor dining, we totally understood in COVID. Everyone was trying to survive, and we supported that effort. But that was, the COVID was, once in a century, and we understand that it brings in money. However, when you're giving with one hand, you're taking away with the other. And the parking is such a big thing for our customer. And we can say use the garage, Hanover, we could say use the other, but it's not usual to get customers if you're telling them what they should be doing. I have had many experiences where our customers, longtime customers, because we have a big return customer base, has said to us, Stephanie, I was going to come in, but I circled and I couldn't find a thing, so I just left. Because we have a coupon that we promote every other month that brings customers to downtown. But when they come down, they can't find a parking space. Our demographic is the over 40 woman, and that can be up to 80. So you do have women in wheelchairs, you have people who are bringing their mothers in, and that greatly impacts our existence. And I know that it's very competitive in the business. We're up against Amazon. So if you do things to hurt any of the retail people, they'll just go home and order it online. And that means they won't be using the restaurants either, because there's no reason for them to come to town if they can find things that they want. It's more of a spur of the moment thing. This is not something that's planned. They don't plan and say, oh, I'm going to go shopping today and buy X, even our return customer. They will want to stop in and see what's new, and then they'll buy. If they can't stop in, if it makes it hard for them to stop in, they won't come. And so we see that if we extend this, the outdoor dining, and I'm sorry, but I don't think the restaurants were empty before COVID in the summer months. If we extend this, then what's going to happen is eventually, will we have to make up the shortfall? Because we pay part of our rent, we have to pay for taxes too. So you're going to outprice any of the smaller boutiques that might come in as a startup that make Portsmouth a unique, go-to place. One of the reasons it's a destination is not only the restaurants, it's because a whole weekend can be, and that's helping the hotels, and the hotels help us, and the restaurants help us without a doubt. But again, we're just looking for an equitable situation that encourages this place to be a continued destination. And I just want to say one other thing, because I don't know if we're comparing, and I'm not sure if the lady who was comparing different cities. Have you compared Salem, Massachusetts? When I think of parking here, I live in Massachusetts, I think of Salem, Massachusetts. Because most people in Massachusetts say, I'm not going to Salem, there's no place to park. And I think that that's a city you should definitely do a comparison to. Much different than Boston, much different than, the aesthetics of the South or whatever. This is something that's New England, they face the winters, they have, quite a few things going on, and this is a city that we should be comparing to, because that's the direction we're going. So anyway, I'm not trying to be, I have another question. When you say that in a situation of an abuttal, that it would be up to the person who, let's say Clay's, if someone was abutting on the front of us, if we said no, would there be a conflict, and how would that be resolved? Could they sue us? Or would we automatically get the right to say no to the person who has the restaurant? And I'm not saying, because I don't know what it would be for us, but that has to be considered, because at some point, it will get to be a contentious situation. And we don't want that. Everyone wants to, believe me, everybody in Portsmouth, all the people who come to visit us say Portsmouth is so great because everybody gets along. We recommend other people. People ask us for recommendations for restaurants. We go out of our way to help so that they will come back and see that it's such a great place to come and visit and shop. And we have women, groups of women who come in and shop, and then they go to a restaurant. So I totally understand the importance of the restaurants. No one is ever doubting that. But you have to keep it in balance. It's a mosaic of things that make Portsmouth special. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any others for public comment? Well, we appreciate everyone coming in and recognize it's a very complicated issue. And just to clarify, Economic Development Commission is certainly for all business within the city, so we value your input and feedback today. We do have one other item on the agenda before we'll have general public comment, and wanted to confirm our next meeting date. And only to briefly comment, since we're past time, that we did receive some commentary from a resident since our past meeting to further explore bringing cruise ships back to the city. So I know there's been a lot of effort expended on that historically. Certainly continue to have some economic vitality in that time frame and some infrastructure improvement in the city. So once we've finished taking up the outdoor dining topic, that is something that we'll further discuss as a commission and connect with those who are stakeholders in that process. And before general public comment, just wanted to ask the commission, so we're meeting late in cycle in June. The first Friday of July would be the week of the 4th, recognizing that that's a common holiday week. Also not wanting to lose much momentum with this discussion, I would put it to the commission whether we want to meet that Friday or postpone until Friday, July 14th.
My only question is Councilor Lombardi's statement about the July 10th date? Is there anything that we would need to do before then that would drive when our next meeting should be?
For the ordinance.
Yes.
The deadline, let me just share with everyone, the deadline to submit materials for the July 10th meeting would be Wednesday, July 5th. The next meeting after July 10th for the council would be Monday, August 7th. They only meet once in July.
So it sounds like we wouldn't be able to meet ahead of that submission deadline anyway.
Right. So if we're going to have commentary or further review of the ordinance, we may need to have a special separate meeting before the, likely on June 30th. I think that would be the last Friday before, either do it virtually or in person. Candidly, haven't had a chance to review the materials that came through for the ordinance, and we would need to distribute that in advance of that meeting. So we'll do that today and advise the group before next week on what next steps would be on that ahead of the July meeting for the council. And then separately, so our next regularly scheduled meeting would either be on the 7th or the 14th of July, outside of the ordinance topic.
My recommendation would be if we meet again on the 30th, we should investigate whether we need to have a July meeting based upon the business we have.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, are we going to, is the subcommittee then going to meet again prior to this next meeting?
Yeah, for the outdoor dining topic?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I think that would be important.
Yeah, I think we need to take up these points that have been brought up this morning.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we'll make that final determination on the June 30th meeting and advise on dates next week.
Because the next city council meeting after the 10th is in August.
Yep. Okay. Okay, so more to follow on that, and we'll just open it up to general public comment if there's anything further.
I'll be quick, I
Sure.
I talked a lot about equity, Page Trace, 27 Hancock Street. I talked a lot about equity earlier, but as a resident, I'm asking for equity here, transparency. You're discussing changes from a governance standpoint, and yet no one here has seen them yet. So it might be nice if the public could see the changes that you're discussing for the ordinance and for the direction of this committee, and we haven't. So that's all I'm saying is, please may we have the paperwork.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Peter Huda, 280 South Street. I'll just add to that, if you're talking about a meeting of the subcommittee, I believe that would be a public meeting also, that the public should be notified on, and the minutes or whatever you're holding would be made public, so public can participate now and at that and in the future. That would be great. Thank you.
Great. If there's nothing further from the commission, would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Any opposed? Thank you, everyone, for joining us.